Challenges and solutions in foreign policy, international security, finance, sustainability and climate change. Network with visionary collaborators in the bold and futuristic city of Astana. Make an impact at the Astana International Forum 2023.
You can change the world around you starting now. For example, buy a car in a day and give it to a close one. Or move into a new apartment where everyone will have their own room. Or start your own business and change other people's lives. Freedom Bank, time to change.
It all started with a spark. And then we tamed the fire. Once we conquered metal, there was nothing that could stop us. We became explorers and pioneers. We never rest on our laurels, and we always strive higher and higher to new horizons. We dig deeper, getting further and further. We are mining more and more. There are many of us, and we are trusted by the whole country, as well as hundreds of partners around the world. Kazakhmys is the copper heart of the country.
NCOC компаниясы біздің ортақ сапарымыздың басынан бастап NCOC компаниясының көзқарасы мен құндылықтарын іске асыру және ізгіліктерді ортақтасатын адамдарды тартатынын мақтан етеді. Біз қауіпсіз жұмыс істеуге, нәтижеге жетуге, ұжымдасып жұмыс істеуге ұмтыламыз және мұнай-газ саласында үздік нәтижелерге
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the opening panel of the Astana International Forum 2023, titled Rethinking Peace, Conflict, and the Global Order. My name is Ali Aslan. I'm an international TV presenter, moderator, and journalist, and it's my great pleasure and privilege indeed to be the moderator of this opening panel here at the Astana International Forum. And we've had, of course, the opening plenary here right on the stage prior to this panel, and many of the points that we're going to take a deeper dive on were obviously touched upon. We are living in a different current state of global peace and security, many challenges that the international community, that international responsible leaders, policymakers, international organizations are facing, and we're going to obviously touch upon those throughout the next 75 minutes. And I couldn't have asked for a more knowledgeable, for a more esteemed panel to take this journey here with me. I'm very delighted to be joined here by somebody who is very, very well known, obviously in Europe, but I'm sure also in this part of the world. He is the former president of the European Commission and is currently the chairman of Goldman Sachs International. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome José Manuel Barroso. Equally delighted to welcome to the stage one of the most prolific thinkers out there in the international policy community. He's the founder and executive chairman of IFRI, the most prestigious international affairs think tank in Paris. He's also the founder of the World Policy Conference. Delighted to welcome him here. Thierry de Montbrial, ladies and gentlemen. She is somebody who is obviously very well known here in these circles. She's the chairman of the Constitutional Court here in Kazakhstan and has previously served as the Commissioner for Human Rights. Welcome, Elvira Azimova. Also delighted, somebody who has been at the forefront for many, many decades of the battle for climate change. He's a former Korean ambassador for climate change and currently director of the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future. Please welcome Rae Kwong Chung. We also have with us here on the panel the director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center and the deputy head of the OSCE Secretariat. Tula Yariola is here with us, ladies and gentlemen. And last but certainly not least, he's the chairman of the Vision and Global Trends, a very prestigious think tank, Institutional Institute for Global Analysis. Tiberio Graziani is here, ladies and gentlemen. José Manuel Barroso, let's dive right into the discussion. A lot to talk about, needless to say. A look at the headlines these days makes your head spinning. We're virtually moving from one conflict to another. Many battlefields, both literally but also theoretically speaking. As somebody who's been at the forefront of policy making for many, many years, notably, obviously, as the former president of the EU Commission, what are the most pressing challenges facing the international community today?
First of all, thank you, Ali, and indeed a great pleasure to be once again here in Astana, in Kazakhstan, a country that I visited many times in the past. Of course, for us in Europe, the most important issue is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But it's not only for Europe. I think the world is no longer to be the same after February last year. Let me speak to you very frankly. We were encouraged by the opening session to be very candid. I believe the world will no longer be the same, because this war has aggravated some trends that has deepened and widened some trends that were there already before. In fact, the pandemic, and I'm also now a chairman of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines. I've been following this very closely. The pressure also in an issue like a global public good, that is public health, how the geopolitics is affecting it. But also we had not only this issue of the war in Ukraine, but increasing rivalry and competition between the United States of America and China. And so there is a real risk for the world of decoupling. The executive director of the IMF, she mentioned this today in diplomatic terms about the fragmentation, economic fragmentation, technological fragmentation, and this adding to the geopolitical fragmentation. I'm no longer in public office, so my sincerity is increasing day by day. I'm telling you only my own experience, but based on my experience, I can tell you this is a very bad moment for this global action and for multilateralism. Just to give an example, I don't mean only the United Nations. For instance, G20. In fact, the G20 was created by a European Union initiative when we went to speak with then President George W. Bush. It was 2008 in Camp David, and we said the G8, at that time it was the G8, Russia was part of G8. The G8 is not sufficient. We need a broader to respond to the financial crisis, to avoid the world going to protectionism, to nationalism. We need at least the G20. And I can tell you, for instance, the level of cooperation between Europe and China was extremely positive, and many others. I don't see that today, quite frankly. Today, we are seeing lack of trust, and I'm afraid it's going to continue. Let's hope this is a self-defeating prophecy. I'm saying that for it not to happen, but I'm afraid we are already in this trend, and that the situation will get worse in the future that we can foresee.
Thank you so much, José Manuel Barroso, for this very candid answer and assessment of where you think we are at the moment. Of course, as a European, you correctly pointed out that the war in Ukraine and its global ramification is something that wears heavily on the European soul and mind at the moment, but obviously also the US-China rivalry and the multipolar world that we're moving towards is something that gives you a great deal of concern. Thank you so much for your first assessment. Of course, I'm going to revert back to you in just a moment. Let me bring in Thierry Montbrial here as well. Thierry, we've known each other for many, many years. I know that the current state of the world, as somebody who's been at the forefront of policy shaping, is of concern to you. Let me also ask you the same question. Which are the biggest and most pressing challenges that you think we, not just as Europeans, because we have two European great minds here with José Manuel Barroso, but yourself as well, but internationally speaking, globally speaking, what are the pressing issues that we're facing?
Thank you, Ali. Well, if I said so far nothing fundamental. I said thank you, Ali. So if you give me only one sentence, I would say there is a real risk, not very high, but a real risk of degenerating towards a third world war. Now, I listened this morning very carefully to the various speeches. I liked very much one of the points made by President Tokayev when he alluded to the necessity, especially from the West, he didn't mention the West particularly, but I would say especially from the West, to be more cautious about ideology. Ideology is very dangerous. We have to be realists. And realism in international affairs is not cynicism. It's very important to distinguish between realism and cynicism. It's essential to be realistic if you want to move towards a more idealist vision, and we must share, and I think this morning it was very clear, we share the idealist vision in the long term. But we have to be very realistic about the situation now if we want to avoid it to degenerate. So now, what should I say? First, I think what you call the rivalry or the strategic rivalry, whatever you call it, between the US and China has to be taken very, very seriously, more seriously than we are doing this morning. There is a real risk, as seen from the viewpoint of think tankers, to degenerate towards a real conflict over Taiwan, but it goes beyond Taiwan in an obvious way. Nobody wants that immediately because the Chinese are not prepared for that now. The US also and all of us want to make trade, develop trade relations for obvious reasons, but nevertheless there is a real risk. As for the Ukraine war, because let us call it a war, as the Ukraine war, nothing happened in the way Putin and others thought at the beginning. It's always like that with wars. You know how wars start. You never know, once started, where they will go. I think most of the experts today would say that in a year from now, it is very unlikely that the conflict will be solved. And it can move in various directions. A third point, and we will stop here for the time being, I am very concerned about the increasing politicization, if not to say weaponization, of trade. You know, through the sanction process, it's very easy to move in a direction that makes trade and economic relation weapons. And this has been theoretical in the works of people like Bob Blackwell, for instance, in the United States and others. This is very dangerous because if we want to maintain a world reasonably open, it has to be reasonably safe for political considerations. So for the time being, I stop here.
Thank you so much. Thank you indeed, Thierry de Montbrial, for your assessment also and evaluation, rather realistically, as you say, about what is taking place in the world's many areas that one has to look for simultaneously, but they're all interconnected, of course. And your rather grim prediction that we don't know where this could lead and this could have much wider impact and ramification is something that should give us all a great deal of concern, of course. Thank you so much for now. I will come back to you, of course, in a moment. But let me, first of all, welcome to the panel the Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Zhang Ming, who's joining us, and want to also bring him in at the end of the day, of course, as the SG of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You have a very broad view of the global challenges that we're facing and that need to be addressed. And I was wondering and hoping that you could give us your take. And I believe you will be speaking in Chinese. So,
yes.
So,
with your permission.
Of course, by all means. For those who are not proficient in Chinese as I am, this is a good time to take out your interpretation kits.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ali, for having given me the floor. I also thank the organizers to speak at this event, at this forum. I believe that this difficult situation that the world has found itself in also urges us to conduct this type of event, especially right now. We are witnessing complex processes and changes that the global society is experiencing. The changes are also being introduced into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The new challenges, the new threats, the new possibilities. Being a person who supports and advocates peace, being a real optimist. Of course, I would like to say that any opportunity is given to the people who are ready for these opportunities. We should thus be prepared. And we can accomplish that through cooperation, through negotiations. My colleagues who are here next to me, they all have vast experience, and they spent at least a part of their lives during the Cold War and after. The Cold War, what does that mean? I believe that we should not dwell on that. We should rather think about the 30 years of the aftermath of the Cold War. I visited a lot of countries, and it is my personal opinion that every country, especially if we talk about developing countries, achieved great results. They achieved developments. Their lifestyle and the quality of life have improved for the better, and the poverty has decreased in these countries. Also, I would like to add and say that after the Cold War, the world, and particularly developing countries, did change for the better. That is why the global community as a whole, and specifically developing countries, are facing these challenges. And of course, right now, we're facing a lot of issues, a lot of challenges, and a lot of conflicts of local nature. I am confident that no head of the state would like to see war at its door. Every country should sit at the table of negotiations and discuss these issues, exchange opinions, considerations, and foster cooperation among our countries. Today, we strive to build the better world. We should tackle all these challenges. We also talk about cybersecurity and cybercrime, AI. These are new challenges that the global community is facing right now. In order to have a better and brighter future, we should cooperate. It is only through cooperation and negotiations that we can achieve this result. This spirit of Shanghai is built on the spirit of cooperation, and it is thanks to the mutually beneficial cooperation and to negotiations that we can provide for security in our region, including economic security. We also see that country members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, these are countries of the Asian region, and President Tokayev earlier in the morning said that those who can work together on challenges will prevail and succeed. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much to Zhang Ming, the Secretary General of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, pointing out the many challenges that we're facing, but at the same time, a plea for everyone. Nobody wants to see war in front of their own borders, he says, and of course, a plea to cooperate and to collaborate in order to tackle the numerous challenges that the international community is facing. Thank you so much for that. I will of course come back to you as well. I want to bring in Tula Yariola here for the time being, the director of the OSCE Conflict Prevention Center and of course deputy head of the OSCE Secretariat. Conflict prevention, Tula, that's what it's all about these days. We're trying to prevent the many conflicts that the international community is facing, the ones that we need to tackle, as Zhang Ming has said. Where do you see, I'm sure a priority list has to be set forth here. Where do you see the most pressing issues?
Yeah, thank you so much. Indeed, conflict prevention, although also crisis management, unfortunately, and I'm not going to go into the whole sort of think known to many in the audience, the basic principles of how one prevents conflict, starting with structural prevention and so forth. But I mean, if I can just sort of pick up on this also based on what was already said, I mean, indeed, the world will be different in the future because of the war against Ukraine, but for many other reasons as well, AI and all these, new technological issues. So I agree very much with that, and I do fear the idea of this fragmentation because the drivers of conflict and the root causes are becoming more complex. So I think, yes, we need to be definitely realists, but at the same, and I think that's the only way to move forward. But at the same time, we need to be realists, but still trying to, let's say, if not be idealists in believing that we all share all the same values, all the same principles, and all the same goals, but that we should be moving back in the direction of agreeing what are the basic principles on which we can build a more peaceful or more stable world. Here in Central Asia, stability is important. And representing the OSCE, I cannot but point out the fact that the road to 1975, when the CSCE, which is what it was called at the time, was formed, it was not overnight. It was a long process between very non-like-minded countries that finally managed to come together in Helsinki, my home country, my home city, in 1975 to agree. So this, I think, gives me hope rather than pessimism, and I tend to be an eternal optimist. So yes, conflict prevention, we need to start from the root causes, from the conflict drivers. We need to agree on what are the most important: climate change, environmental degradation. Let's start with those, right? And then let's say, how useful is it for us to be disagreeing on other things when we need to address these?
Thank you so much. An optimistic note, while at the same time remaining realistic, of course, in the face of the many challenges. Your own country, Finland, of course, in light of the ongoing events that we've been facing for a year and a half, has joined NATO after many, many years of neutrality, political neutrality. I think paying sort of tribute to the realism that is taking place, at least in your neighborhood, in the proximity of your neighborhood. Rek Wong Chong, we talked, of course, and inevitably, about the war in Ukraine and its global ramifications. We're talking about the US-China relations. We're talking about the rise of the global south, the future role of Central Asia. But there's one conflict and one challenge, rather, that binds us all, no matter where we live, and that is, of course, climate change. It's a topic that you have been working on for more than 3 decades at the forefront, not just as former Korean ambassador for climate change, but as an advocate. Of course, the numbers are out there. Humanity, the Paris Climate Agreement, we want to reach net zero by 2050. By all accounts, if we're looking at the indicators and numbers, so far, we don't seem to be making the progress that needs to be made. Is that a fair assessment? And more importantly, how do we achieve these ambitious goals that the international global order has set forth for itself?
Okay, first of all, it is my great pleasure to be back to Astana
forum because I have been attending many times in Astana Forum. And I think the climate issue, we cannot separate climate issue from the economic issue and the social issue. It is all intertwined. And so understanding what is the driving force or the root cause of the current conflict and the fragmentation, to me, it is the excessive intensification of competition, which is justifying victory at all cost. And also, winner-take-all mentality is justifying intensifying competition, not only in trade side, also in the political side. So to me, the current situation we are stuck now is a kind of hangover or aftermath of a brilliant success of a free market capitalism since the Second World War. And the all global economy has dramatically grown. We have enjoyed the success, and we have witnessing the fall of socialism, and we were rejoicing the victory of a free market. And the globalization, we were in 1990s and 2000, we were praising globalizations. And now all of a sudden, we are facing fragmentation and deglobalization. I think it is because of the backlash from the success of free market capitalism and globalization, because there are certain downside, and this downside was not properly taken care, and then it exploding. I think this is the situation we are witnessing right now. And on a climate front, we cannot push climate agenda when we are experiencing this kind of fragmentation and intensification of competition on trade, economic, industrial competitiveness issue. And then I think it will be very difficult to promote climate agenda. Number one is intensification of competition. We have to think about how we can manage this competition. Number two, we are too much obsessed about extreme short-termism. Extreme short-termism. Wall Street, Bitcoin, all this showing that everybody is crazy about millionaire overnight. Under this current extreme short-termism, climate change is a long-term issue. Very difficult to expand our horizon of our mind for long-term issues. So this has been, to me, how can we transform our mindset only from competition and the short-termism towards long-termism and also certain cooperation and the collaboration. These should be the main contents of the dialogue and the multilateralism. This morning we heard a lot about the importance of dialogue and multilateralism, but dialogue for what? Dialogue for fair competition that is inclusive, that can take care of the negative side of the competition, and also we have to address the extreme short-termism. Then I think this should be the agenda for the dialogue and the long-term multilateral cooperation. I will come back to the details of climate later.
Yes, most definitely. In the second round, you will get an opportunity to speak in more detail. But of course, I think your initial remarks have been very clear and unambiguous. For one, to turn the climate crisis into growth opportunities and to shy away from short-termism, as you call it. But of course, in most countries, short-termism is a sign that leaders need to run for office every 4 or 5 years, and therefore are in somewhat of a pickle, as we say. But thank you so much for that. We will, of course, come back to that. But Elvira Azimova, if I may turn to you, it's obviously we're all here at the Astana International Forum. We're in Kazakhstan. I think it's indicative of your country's growing significance and its ambition. We've talked about that the international world order is changing. We're seeing new alignments, we're seeing new players, we're seeing new collaborations, and we're seeing, of course, a region and a country, in the case of Kazakhstan in particular, that can play a pivotal role moving forward. I was wondering if you could speak to that. Where do you see your country's position in the international changing order that we're clearly moving towards? All your four speakers have indicated that the multipolar world is right here before us, and the role of Kazakhstan is something that I think is going to grow in significance. I want to get your take on this.
I think that this question is closely linked to what the other speakers had to say. I think that speaking about the role of Astana, our main role is not to be on the sidelines and rather take part in these processes related to dialogue and peaceful resolution of conflicts. And in this regard, I think that Kazakhstan has indicated its position quite clearly in international arena. We have the representatives of international organizations here, and I just wanted to continue with the thought of Mr. Barroso. If we are talking about the war, I think that the danger of the present situation is that the war can even happen without real weapons. It can rather create other types of consequences, be it social or economic. Some of the conflicts can be very slow. Some of them might be even invisible to us. Take a look at the sanctions. There are no winners or losers there, because not only the parties who are direct participants of the conflict suffer because of that. If you look at Kazakhstan, for instance, if you look at Astana, we can already see some of the forced migrants that move to our country from both sides of the conflict. And in this regard, for instance, me being a representative of the Constitutional Court, and it's been created only 5 months ago, but basically this institution is a clear demonstration for a way to resolve conflicts peacefully. Although, of course, in our scope of work, we mostly talk about the collisions between the law and enforcement and the citizens, but I think that's an example of a dialogue in the legal area. And it is the dialogue that is necessary during the conflict and also as the way to prevent conflicts. And I think that the law is a very good tool. For instance, in the current situation, the direct participants of the conflict are elsewhere, but we in Astana are affected. So we clearly state that we promote peace and security. But the question, I think, is different. It's the question of the relevance of the existing tools given the current realities. And I think that the modern technologies have already proven that the old tools are not enough anymore, they're outdated. And if we are talking about multipolar world, we also need to talk about the multipolar dialogue.
Thank you so much, Elvira Azimova, for your take, for your assessment. Jose Manuel Barroso, I'm going to give you a chance in just a moment to respond, if you will, but of course, to round up the first order, I want to bring in Tiberio Graziani, another thought leader in the sphere of international policy. And Tiberio, I think it's become abundantly clear from everything that we've heard up until now that we need to find a way to navigate through the changing international orders. We're seeing new alignments. There seems to be a need for a different approach in international relations due to the presence of new global and regional players. The old formulas no longer work. I think that's for certain. How do we navigate through these waters, through these 21st century changing orders?
Thank you, Mr. Aslan, for this question. And let me say thanks to share with some distinguished panels some ideas and consideration. Regarding the change of a paradigm, I suppose that is a need in this historical, very dramatic context. If you assume that we are in the transition between the unipolar moment and some different that from an academic point of view we can call multipolar or polycentric, we don't know. But we have to think about peace, conflict with a different approach. We have to find the structural lines that are under the tension. The tension that there are in the world are tensions that arise in the competition, the confrontation sometimes between conservative forces striving to maintain their hegemony and the growing weight of new global actors. This tension shapes dramatically current international politics. So we have to assume a different approach. Instead of the approach of how to resolve the so-called arc of crisis, we have to stress a different idea, the idea of the hinge of the cooperation. And I suppose that the presence of new actors, we don't have to obstaculate the presence of new actors, because new actors as China, as India, maybe in Latin America and Brazil, are the nation of the present of the future. So we have actively collaborate with this. We have to find a model in order to build bridges instead of walls. For instance, I suppose that it's very important when there is some leader, international leader, that speaks about peace in this period, we have to listen to him. We don't have to reject from an ideological point of view, for instance, the 10 points of the China. We have to listen to the Vatican, we have to listen to the South Africa, to Brazil, and also in the last days also to Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed, Tiberio Graziani, for your assessment. During the first round, I think we did what any doctor would do when he or she faces a patient. You get an analysis. First of all, you're looking at the root causes of the global conflicts, of the unfortunate deterioration of dialogue and diplomacy that we're seeing worldwide. We have 30 minutes left, and in this second round, I would like to move, now that we've established sort of a diagnosis, determine and point out some remedies, if you will, medicine, some recommendations as to how we improve the dialogue and diplomacy, because at the end of the day, and regardless where we all from here on this panel or in the audience, we all want stability and international cooperation. I think that's clear. The idea and the question is how. Jose Manuel Barroso. I think it's become abundantly clear the world order that we've had post-Cold War, the United States, Washington as the center, the gravity center of power, as the sole power rather, is no longer existing. We're seeing the many countries around the world, China the most obvious, but India, South Africa, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, you name it. These countries are no longer content just to stay on the sidelines. On the contrary, they want to be on a global player as well. They want to have a word and a seat at the table. How and that is, of course, the question now. And feel free, because I've seen you take diligent notes while many of the speakers were giving their pointers. Based on your long-time experience as a policymaker at the forefront, how do we navigate through these rough waters?
Thank you, Ali. So first of all, it's true that today there is a global situation different from the past. But I don't think we should put the old order out before having a new one. With all its imperfections, the United Nations, World Bank, IMF, other global institutions are better than no institutions at all. This is very important to understand. And I believe the solution, or working for a solution, has to be based on international law. I don't see an alternative better than to work in the framework of what we usually call international law. International law means, for instance, respect of the sovereignty of different countries, national independence, territorial integrity. So regarding the conflict with Ukraine, I think this should be the basis for negotiations, for conversations, for works for peace. And I agree, we should listen to all proposals that try to work for peace. And I believe that we should always keep dialogue, including with those who are seen as enemies or opponents. By the way, it's mainly with those that we have to speak. I mean, we can also speak between friends and allies, but we have to speak with those that don't agree with us. So that is my first point. Yes for dialogue, yes for cooperation. This dialogue and cooperation has to be taken on the basis of international law, the principles that have been agreed, namely in the United Nations. Now, the issue of sanctions, I'd like to make a reference there. I'm not, once again, I'm not representing the European Union anymore. I'm here as a personal citizen, but I can give you my very sincere opinion, also because I remember when I was in the Commission, when the European Union member states decided to have the first sanctions against Russia after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, I was in the room, I was in the decision. It's not the Commission that takes that decision, it's the member states, but I remember well the discussion. And in fact, personally, I do not have great trust in the effectiveness of sanctions. I always say that. If sanctions worked, then North Korea would already have given up its nuclear program, Iran would already have given up its nuclear program. They are under sanctions, but apparently this is not happening. Probably the only case in relatively recent history where sanctions had a very positive effect was against South Africa apartheid. And in that case, all the world, almost all the world, was in favor of sanctions. Sanctions against apartheid regime. So, from a European perspective, when there is a war in Europe, and there is one country that is aggressing another one, there are three possible positions. One thing is to do nothing, or to make a diplomatic, let's say, regrets communique. Another thing is to go to war. And there is another thing, it's the intermediate, it's sanctions. So I want you to understand that in politics, it's always about the counterfactual. Of course, sanctions is not a good solution, but the alternatives probably will be worse. That's the fact. Now, I am very aware of the consequence that has in our economies. By the way, the European Union countries and economies are suffering because of sanctions. Because, for instance, the main supplier of gas to Europe was by far Russia, 60%. And now it's almost zero. And that at a huge cost for the families, for the households, for the companies. I'm very aware of the cost for Kazakhstan, by the way. And we in the European Union, and I'm not speaking for the European Union now, but 40% of the trade of Kazakhstan is in the European Union. European Union is the #1 trade partner of Kazakhstan and the #1 investor in Kazakhstan still today. So we have a great sympathy for Kazakhstan. So of course it's unfair for a country like Kazakhstan to suffer some of these consequences. But we are suffering those consequences as a result of a situation that was not originated by Kazakhstan, and it was not originated by the European Union. And we spoke about Finland. Finland joining NATO, or Sweden, that I think is going to happen very soon, it was unthinkable. If you have asked me in January last year, can we imagine Finland member of NATO? I'll say impossible. But now, this is a result of an action that was not generated by Finland or by the European Union, but as a response. So it's important to understand where the responsibility lies if we want to solve the problem. And I believe to solve the problem, it should keep and in fact enhance our dialogue and cooperation.
Thank you so much. May I just, if you allow, for maybe a quick 30 seconds, 60 seconds follow-up, because you have talked about the role of the United Nations and that it ought to be respected, ought to be strengthened, and that is still an institution that you like to play a role. But recent examples and incidents, of course, have shown that the United Nations, when it really comes down to it, in particular the Security Council, is paralyzing itself. At the end of the day, the decision mechanisms there do not work. I know that we have a separate session on the UN, so we're not going to take a deeper dive here, but I still want to get your take, because you have passionately pleaded for a role of the United Nations. There seems to be a gridlock that the UN cannot overcome. What is the solution?
Yes, but I don't see an alternative to the better alternative to the United of all the situations. So, but that does not mean that we can now put an end to the United Nations, because we don't have, at least until now, we don't have a better alternative. So I'm in favor of continuing the dialogue also in the United Nations. I think it's important because that's the only global organization with some kind of global legitimacy. At the same time, we should be open to other initiatives. If there are initiatives that can bring peace between Russia and Ukraine, of course that's very important to work. But at the end of the day, the framework of reference and of global legitimacy, I think it should remain the United Nations.
Thank you so much. Zhang Ming, you've been very clear and unambiguous in your opening remarks about the need for stability and international cooperation. Of course, the role that your institution, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is willing to play in this particular regard. Again, since we're looking at solutions and future recommendations here, it is clear that the global order is changing rapidly with new regional and national and global players. Your plea, of course, for stability and international cooperation, I think, is widely understood and embraced. The question, of course, is how. We talked about the many areas of conflict that has been addressed on this panel. What's the way out here?
I should say that maybe I wouldn't be a great doctor giving the medications, but of course I could come up with some medicines. In terms of the current situation on the international arena, I think that first point, I fully support what Mr. Barroso has mentioned, because indeed the global order is facing tremendous challenges, but UN remains a platform to tackle these challenges, and I think that they're stepping up to this job. And I also think that the international community should continue respecting the United Nations principles. It should continue respecting the rights of individual countries, and that is the foundation for the dialogue.
And we should bring the world order to order based on justice, fairness, to make sure that the global order continues to work to ensure prosperity. And second point, I would like to note that based on the consensus, I think that if we get to a consensus, we will ensure the operation of the principles of multilateralism, because it is the UN that serves as the basis for international multilateral cooperation. If we want to resolve the problems, we should continue to work on the basis of the UN. The UN should be the platform to bring us together to tackle the issues, rather than trying to solve the issues individually and issue our own medicines. And the third point, it is the question of security. I think it still remains one of the key issues for the world. We shouldn't forget about the issues of terrorism, extremism, and separatism. Therefore, although today we are not only talking about these three aforementioned evils, there are also the issues of transnational crime, cyber crimes, weapons smuggling, drug trafficking, climate change. All of these issues have huge ramifications and create significant damages. In the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we primarily focus on security and stability. And in the 20 years of our operation, we could say that we've been ensuring stability and security in the region where we work. And the way we were able to achieve that was through cooperation, dialogue, negotiations. And certainly, an important factor is economics. The economy is crucial for the developing countries. And I could say that the hungry person will never understand the person with a full belly, and the hungry person will always be looking for development, for improvements in their lives. And currently, I think that globally, in the world, we see a whole range of issues, starting with poverty and malnutrition, all the way to the problems of the higher order. And we should tackle all of these issues together. If we don't combine our efforts, the whole global community will deteriorate further. And my fourth point is that our world is based on civilizations. There are multiple cultures in the world, and we need to promote tolerance, and we need to promote the idea of mutual understanding between the countries. And we need to recognize the value of each other. And only through implementation of these principles, we will be able to come to a consensus, and we will be able to join our forces. And at the end, I wanted to say that in the world, there are many other international organizations in addition to the UN. And if these other organizations can come together, it can become closer and strengthen their cooperation, I'm confident we would achieve greater progress. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that continues to work on establishing cooperation with other organizations is one of the examples. I'm not sure that my medication will be useful, but that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you are, of course, very right to have pointed out the aspects of poverty, of discrepancies amongst countries as far as development is concerned, about food security. These issues are often overlooked when we're just moving within the very traditional realms of security thinking. But you couldn't be more right, of course, to say that the priorities of a country and a region changes depending on what development level they are at. I think your saying beautifully sums it up, that the person who's full with a full stomach cannot properly and fully relate to the starving one. Thank you so much for that. Thierry Montbrial, you have in your initial remarks very pointedly and blatantly warned of an escalation of the conflicts that we're in right now. You even used the term World War III, something that I think we're all here in this room and beyond are trying to avoid at any cost, and nobody has an interest in that. As somebody who's been at the forefront of these developments for many years, what then is your advice to policymakers worldwide in order to foster the collaboration, dialogue, and cooperation that everyone here on this stage is seeking for?
Thank you, Ali. First, I would like to say that in a conversation with a very prominent Chinese leader a few months ago, I won't tell his name, I asked him about the possibility of a third world war. And his answer, he was Chinese, he is Chinese, he's a prominent figure, the third world war has already started. I'm quoting a Chinese leader. Now, I will make three, because I'm a good Frenchman, I will make 3 points. You know, the French always have 3 points, not 4. That's for the Chinese, 3 for me. First, I think that we have lost, especially in the West, we have lost the habit of thinking strategically. We think emotionally, we think ideologically, whatever you call it, legally, we interpret international law and so forth and so on. We do not think strategically, and that's very much related to the point which was made by one of us earlier about short-termism. You know, long-termism is thinking long-term. The Chinese, in that way, are probably the best among all of us. Congratulations. We think like in business. You know, we are looking about the results of the next three months. Okay. Take the problem of sanctions, for instance, that Mr. Barroso spoke about it very eloquently. The problem with sanctions is what I mentioned at the beginning, because we are politicizing, weaponizing trade. And this will have long-term consequences. Because if I am the victim of sanctions, or indirect victim of sanctions, what do? I want to rely on my own forces. I don't want to depend anymore on the others. So thinking strategically, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly that. You know, thinking long-term, the consequences of what you are doing. In the EU, the problem today with the EU, we do not think strategically. We have only 2 weapons. What are strategic weapons? What are they? Sanctions. I think on Russia, they are probably on 12th, 13th, I don't know, package of sanctions. And we promise a further enlargement. But you know, if every day we promise a new country enlargement, what will be the future of the European Union itself? Will the European Union survive? That's a question. No, that was my first point. My second point is that it's very nice, of course, it's better to solve conflicts by negotiations, discussions, tolerance. I fully agree to that. But if I look at the history of the Middle East in the last 50 years, you know, the best way to interpret it is definitely to go to 19th century thinking, not to current thinking, 19th century thinking, you know, including the most recent developments. It is pure balance of forces, alliances, and this sort of things. So I think we have also to be historic-minded. We have to think about history, you know. This leads me to my third and last point, which is the real answer to the question, what to do. In my humble judgment, what we have to do is a combination of multilateralism plus international law on the one hand. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, do not confuse multilateralism and international law. These are two different concepts. Multilateralism is about organizations, and international law is the background, the legal framework where everything has to take place. So, so on the one hand, we have indeed to promote multilateralism on the basis of international law, to develop regional organizations within the UN framework, no doubt about it. But this is not enough. We have, on the other hand, to work since, you know, Mr. Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, got 100 years old last week. Okay. So, in honor of him, I would say that we have to work with the principle not of balance of forces. Balance of forces is a 17th or 18th century concept, is a very crude concept. But on the basis of balance of interests, we have to understand that we have to take respectfully into account the fundamental interests of our neighbors, even if we dislike them. This is what Kissinger did exactly 50 years ago in the Middle East, in the 1973 war, because the Arabs had attacked Israel. Israel then found itself in a position to crush Egypt, and what Kissinger did, he said, no, I will not allow Israel to crush Egypt entirely. And he was right. So it is only by respecting the fundamental interests of the others, and I go back also to my point on ideology, and on this I think I would agree with my Chinese friend in particular, it is only on the basis of the respect of one another's, of everybody's fundamental interests, that also with multilateralism, etc., we can hope to achieve a better, more peaceful world.
Thank you so much, Thierry de Montbrial. Blunt and frank, as always, as we know you, the plea for more mutual respect, being more history-minded, and of course a plea to European but Western leaders to be more strategic-minded moving forward. Thank you so much. Tula Yariola, you in your remarks, you've spoken, of course, about how to prevent conflicts, but also how to manage the crisis once it's there. Let me also get your final remarks and your medicine, if you will, your remedy, your solution as to how we do rethink peace, conflict, and the global order.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I have to just start by saying that I'm both lucky and unlucky. I'm lucky that I don't need to cover the entire world and its conflicts, and I am unlucky because in the OSCE region we have one very major conflict, but also others, and recognition of the instabilities. I'm also not only a realist, optimist, and a pragmatist, and in that sense I might have a bit of a boring solution, but I think one that at least would take things forward. I mean, I think if we don't get our act together, we will have a worse hangover. But so first of all, yeah, I mean, multilateralism, I think, I fully support. I think we need the UN. We also need the OSCE in the region that we cover. We need inclusive discourse, and inclusive in various ways. Inclusive, including all, countries, states, but also inclusive, including the youth, future women. I mean, the inclusivity goes much further, and if we try to find, the way to finding sort of, like, say, basic common causes that we could work for, I think the international organizations are exactly the ones which provide the platform for that. In terms of confidence building, which I think we need to do, we need to remember, and this is something we do, we think about all the time in the OSCE, is confidence building both on the civilian front, that addresses a lot of these underlying root causes issues also, and also on the military front. The type of confidence building, we're in Vienna, we're thinking about European security architecture. When can we get back to even a discussion of that? But we need to be thinking about that. And then really just working together in the field. The OSCE, certainly the UN, many other international organizations do a lot of good work in the field. So can we maybe be working together, let's start at that level. The political discourse can be very, very, let's say, difficult right now. But if we are pragmatic, we can still continue to work in the field on issues that bring us closer to having that confidence that we need to have the trust. And then in terms of thinking strategically, I mean, it is unfortunately difficult. I think it boils down to, and this is my last point, how could we kind of make the point, advertise the point that there is a choice that we need to make, and in terms of what we want is, do we want to promote a world that is based on power politics, or a world that is based on a rules-based, let's say, multilateral, a rules-based order that then will enable us to work together? And I think that's where we need to get to. So you said about earlier, and there was the discussion of old formulas don't work. They don't work as such, but I think that they can still provide us some tools for the future as well.
Thank you so much, Tuula Raiola, for your final assessment, final remarks. Of course, pragmatism is a word, a big one combined with idealism, but probably not misplaced when you're looking for creative solutions to the many problems that we're facing. Of course, Rek Wong Chung, all of these conflicts that we've talked about are completely meaningless if we're living on a planet that is uninhabitable. If the living conditions on this planet as such are so unbearable that I think many of the conflicts and crisis hurts that we've talked about are becoming minor compared to what could happen. So I want to give you the opportunity in your final remarks about the way out when it comes to climate change, about addressing climate change and the right recipe.
Okay, thank you. Since I mentioned as a root cause excessive competition and short-termism, so the way out should be an understanding that cooperation and long-termism is more beneficial. We have to understand that we are losing a lot by extreme short-termism and excessive competition. So we have to realize that. So this will be pragmatism. That thinking about long-term, thinking about cooperation is much more beneficial. So we have to understand it. And then, turning on to the climate front, in order to take a meaningful action for climate change, we have to change our economics thinking that whenever we think about climate change, economists are coming out, there are $1 trillion of cost. All these economists are always saying that there is a huge cost to address climate change. This kind of thinking and mentality has to be changed. It is not a cost, it is an investment. If you think a long term, it's an investment. But if you think short term, it's a cost. So if you change to a long term, we have to think $1 trillion not as a cost, but investment for green industry, new economic growth opportunity. This is an idea I promoted in 2005 as a green growth paradigm. And I'm still working, but quite difficult. In order to promote this, I think it is very important, not only just focusing on money and technology, but the price signal. Country like Kazakhstan, with a limited money and limited technology, how can they make a meaningful impact on climate change? It can only be done by improving fossil fuel price signals so that consumption production pattern in the long run can go low carbon. It cannot be done overnight, but long run. But in order to that, I would like to add two more points. First of all, the current global climate regime is too much focusing on the responsibility of the government and business. I think it is wrong. Ultimate responsibility rests on all consumers. But in the equation of a current climate regime, NDC, nationally determined contribution, is a nation, country, government making commitment. Where are the citizens? Where are the consumers? They are the ultimate responsible people. But in our regime, global regime, we don't have any kind of platform the consumers can join and contribute. So we have to design a system where the consumers can voluntarily join and contribute. I call it PDC compared to NDC. It's a personally determined contribution. Without green consumers, we can have a green economy. Without people concerned about climate change, we cannot have a climate action. I'm skeptical about NDC, frankly to say, because there's no individual contribution mechanism is available. So we have to make it available. The second point is we are only focusing on industry and business, but we are failing to think of a consumption. For example, Korea is exporting Hyundai Motor to Europe and United States. Who is responsible for the CO2 emission from the Hyundai car produced? It's Korea, not the consumers in the United States or in Europe. They are not responsible for their consumption of CO2. So this is, we need to revise this kind of calculation. Then lastly, one more point that tomorrow, during the lunchtime, there will be a book be launched, the New Kazakhstan, Steering the Step Amid the Global Turmoil, something like that. There I wrote an article of the details of how the countries like Kazakhstan can turn climate crisis into opportunity.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the pitch and reminder. Yes, please. For the book presentation, something that I'm sure a lot of people have already added to their agenda. Not to see the efforts that each and every individual country have to make regarding climate change as a cost, but rather as an opportunity. I think that is pivotal here. Elvira Azimova, I would like to give you as our host the final word of this panel and move to Tiberio Graziani, and then hear from you as our host, Elvira Azimova, last, sort of get a resume, get a conclusion of this final. But Tiberio, I want to give you the opportunity, obviously, to chime in here. We're talking remedies, we're talking solutions. We've already heard a number of solutions here, from international law.
In the frame of the geopolitics of peace, that is not a contradiction, because it's a very, very operative geopolitics. It's the geopolitics of the infrastructure, the connectivity. For instance, because we are in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia, we know that Central Asia is, for some aspect, a fragmented area because of several ethno-cultural diversity for a lot of situations. But if we see in this way, we stress the potential arc of a crisis of this region. If we think in the frame of a geopolitics of peace, we can think that building infrastructure, connectivity, because we know that Central Asia is just a segment of the axis coming from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. So we can find a geopolitical identity for this region in order so that this region as an entire area can have a function in the new order, global order, as a hub, for instance, if we insist on the infrastructure. This is a very proposition, I mean, okay.
Thank you so much indeed, Tiberio, for your final remarks and the input that I'm sure has been taken note of quite cautiously. Elvira Azimova, as our host, if you will, and as the representative of the government of Kazakhstan, I want to give you a chance for concluding remarks. Obviously, it's impossible to sum up everything that's been said in the previous 75 minutes. That should not be your task and the burden, but I want to get your take, of course, and your reaction to everything you've heard up until now. We are once again talking about a way out of the dilemma that the international community finds itself in. Very, very curious to hear your remedy and your final remarks.
Well, actually, all of the comments by our panelists demonstrate that in terms of understanding of how we can become more active participants in the global order, I think that many of the thoughts are in common. I am very grateful to Mr. Barroso, who continued this thought of the sanction policy, but I think that time has come for all of us to understand that we can no longer just try and shut the doors to the room to prevent people from leaving. This is no longer relevant. Shutting the doors won't be effective. Another thing is what kind of tools could we use to tackle the challenges? Speaking about international organizations, and the speakers have mentioned the Security Council here, but the UN has many other organizations and institutions, and we often forget about it. For instance, during the plenary session, we heard from the chairman of UNESCO, and there are so many tools available to us to preserve the cultural, moral values of the societies. We've mentioned the rule of law, which is important, which ensures sustainable development. But another matter is that we need to make sure that all people respect the law, because the law is there to prevent chaos and violence. The societies need the law to prevent anarchy. And the same is true for international organizations and international platforms. We do need them. Of course, every doctor can prescribe their own remedy for the problem, but if you bring a team of doctors together, you will find a better solution and better treatment. So be it the Shanghai Cooperation Organization with the matters of security, education, or professional development of the law enforcement bodies, or someone else, that is still something that we need. If we talk about the Security Council and criticize that not all of the decisions are made, but we need to go through the list, like the moderator did. He changed the order of speakers, although I am very grateful to be the last one to speak to answer your question. But there are opportunities presented to us, there is flexibility presented to us by international organizations. Another thing that brings us together, although I'm not a French person, but I also wanted to make 3 points. First of all, in terms of the tools, I think that the first tool is related to international organizations. And let me mention that here in Kazakhstan, we are implementing the concept of a listening state. And I think that that is the concept that we need for international organizations. We need to be able to listen to and hear all parties. The second point I wanted to make is related to morality and ethics. And I've been in many platforms where we discussed culture, and especially when we met with the economists, we often took the positions on how the economy can help to preserve culture and traditions or to develop new values, but we should rather shift our focus and we should say that we need to think about how the culture can help in creating peace and stability. And I think that these are important tools. And another point is that we need to be talking about the citizens. And during the first round of questions, I mentioned our constitutional court. And actually, it might be called something else in other countries, be it constitutional council or other names. And I think that 114 countries have recognized an institution of this kind. And this institution not only gives remedies to the citizens to be able to talk about their specific cases and remedy the situation, but I think in the same way, the citizens individually can contribute to eliminating the gaps and collisions in the law. And when they do so, they do it not only for their own sake, but also for the sake of all other citizens. And Mr. Barroso has mentioned the European Commission, and I think that even in Europe, countries might have different attitudes. And I think that we need to use international platforms to make our citizens heard, because it is the citizens, the community, which creates the attitudes in the society, and then the governments develop their policies based on the attitude of the society. The big question would be what kind of model can be used for that. And I think it's one of the objectives that we have. We need to search for new instruments. Yes, we do have resolutions, classic resolutions, like 1325, which was adopted by the UN. But I think time has come to create new tools, to add new tools. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, rethinking peace, conflict, and the global order. That's what we have done throughout the past 75 minutes. And I think you would agree that this has been a very diverse, content-rich, and inspiring and thought-provoking discussion. And I think it's abundantly clear after everything that we've heard, regardless whether you're from Portugal, China, France, Finland, Korea, Kazakhstan, Italy, whether you're from Europe, from Central Asia, from Asia, the commonalities are still thankfully greater than our differences. And I think that is one thing that should and must give us hope when we are facing and tackling these very rough waters ahead. I think that's for certain. José Manuel Barroso, Zhang Ming, Rek Wong Chung, Elvira Azimova, Thierry Montbrial, Tiberio Graziani, and Tula Yariola, thank you so much. This is your applause. Very much appreciated. Thank you. And this concludes the opening panel of the Astana International Forum. Obviously, this is just the beginning with many more sessions to come. Enjoy today and tomorrow, and wishing you a wonderful and fruitful forum. Thank you so much for your attention.